My apologies to actor and comedian Dan Fogler. I promise you, last week on After Schmoe, I was trying to make a joke towards my buddy Christian's new podcast. I was trying to make a joke at his expense, not yours. Your film, Scenic Route, affected me very deeply. As a matter of fact, I watched it.
Is it route or is it route?
Scenic, I don't know. I guess it is. It could be either one. That's fine. It depends on what area you're from. But a friend of mine recommended that movie to me when it was on Netflix a few years ago, and it actually inspired me, helped me finish the screenplay that I was working on then and there. So yeah, I'm probably one of the only people that can say that I appreciated that film, and I'm 100% serious. But anyway, so my apologies to him. I didn't mean to rip him last week. Jay, I'm not gonna lie, I was sort of hyperventilating before we went on air because you just told me about the podcast network and where they currently sit on the iTunes charts, and I'm sort of panicking. Can you tell the audience what you just told me?
Yeah, you're freaking out right now, man. It's all right. It's all good. You got to play it cool. You got to play it cool, you know.
I'm not good at that.
Well, we're the number one podcast on iTunes, right? I say we, but the podcast feed that we're on, Movie Talk, who's carrying the heavy lifting. It's all good, man. It's all good. We're gonna, John Schnepp can have his Schnepp zone, but we have the after zone, right? We can take the phrase after with us. We are taking it with us, and we're gonna take this whole crew, this whole world into a maybe not a new stratosphere, but definitely a different stratosphere for sure.
Yeah, I didn't hear a word you just said just because I'm in full panic mode. If you guys didn't know, I think this is the last episode of After Schmoe.
It is.
That's because we are moving to the Collider Podcast Network, our brand new show, Collider Afterthoughts. I know Christian thinks it's like Collider Afterbirth or whatever the hell he said. Collider Afterthoughts will be on the Movie Talk podcast feed, I believe, starting next week, and that's what this entire episode of, or most of what this episode of After Schmoe is going to be. We're going to explain the podcast network to you guys, but I just wanted to say thank you to you, Jay.
Yeah, no problem.
Because you came on a year ago, and I think together, you and I, we know each other. We live right down the street from each other. With your help, I've been able to sort of fulfill my dream, and now we get to be on the Collider Movie Talk feed. So I want to thank you. I want to thank Christian. I want to thank Ellis for always being my number one fan. I want to thank Fernandez and just everybody who's ever supported this show, and that includes our listeners. We could not have done it without you. So thank you from the bottom of my heart.
Yeah, it's been nice. You start out in this land as a cocky prick, and then you end up on the Collider feed. It's been a nice run. I'm going to miss After Schmoe just because it feels, I don't know, it's always sort of felt like we were doing pirate radio, and now the shills that all we do is talk shit about this whole crew, now we're going to be going official. And I'm excited, and I echo every single thing that you said. Big shout out to all of our listeners and our friends and our family on SK Plus and our family on Collider, and I'm excited, man. I'm excited about the future of things.
With that being said, let's record the final episode of After Schmoe. Hello and welcome. I am about to have a panic attack. That's my thing. My name is Ryan Snelling. Thank you so much for joining us. Jaye Williams, how are you tonight?
I'm good, man. I'm feeling fantastic. Business as usual. Around these parts, it could mean anything. It could mean we could be tinkering with the Fox Marvel properties. It could mean an abundance of things here. But we're going to bid adieu to After Schmoe. Goodbye, Beardo. It's been nice to know you.
How do you know Beardo isn't going to be involved with Collider Live?
I'm sure he will be. In fact, I actually hope that he is. I mean, we're going to get into it, but that's sort of the most strange thing to wrap my head around, like how that's going to look and how that's going to actually work. But I think the most exciting thing is that Brett Sheridan is going to be on Collider, which is the most. If you actually say it out loud and think about it, like, I just want Brett Sheridan and John Schnepp to interact with each other.
I'm sure that'd be amazing. There are a lot of people that I have missed. Makuga was promised to come back as well. We'll get into it. Collider Live is going to be a big discussion point here today. Yeah, a lot to do here. Let's just get into it. We're going to talk plenty about all this new stuff going on. Last week, I tried to introduce a segment called New News. If you don't know, that's what I call testicles. Jaye Williams makes it nearly impossible to stay on track with this show, so I don't know if I'm going to continue New News, but it might pop back up next week. But if you think about it, though, everything we discuss is kind of new news, so maybe the segment doesn't even make any sense. That's okay. This just turned into an on-air production meeting. But yeah, there's a lot to get to. We got to walk it back a little bit. There's some stuff that happened last week. Jay and I record this on Thursday nights. Sometimes Collider content isn't even out yet, so sometimes we don't get to discuss Caption This or Jedi Council. We missed Harloff and Ellis last week, so all of this basketball game drama unfolded with Roca, so Team Patriots versus Top 10. There's this basketball game, this production that is getting ramped up right now as we speak. Ellis is going to ref. They talked about it last week on Harloff and Ellis. We didn't get to. I want to know your reaction to all of that.
Well, yeah, I mean, we've talked about it a little bit, but just because of not the game itself, but just talking about Harloff and Ellis, the fact that the show was coming out on Thursdays sort of was an issue for us to actually, go back an entire week, but we were always going to do that if the discussion warranted it, and of course it did with last week's episode with this whole basketball game thing. I do want your opinion, though, real quick. We joke a lot about how effective our discussion is on the world that we talk about. I think the fact that a Wednesday show, the show this week came out on Wednesday, was directly influenced by you and I. What is your take on that before we get into the basketball game talk?
I think I said it on air last week. It's hard to remember. You and I have so many conversations on air and off air. It's hard to remember which one is which. But I remember joking about the fact that, I forgot the joke. But regardless, the joke was I had missed the press release because apparently Harloff and Ellis was a Thursday show, because I think the last 2 weeks it came out on Thursday. So you're absolutely right. It was funny, and the first thing that came to my mind when it dropped last night was, of course, this is because of us. But not only that, they were pretty timely today in general. Like, Caption This came out hours earlier than it has the past 2 weeks. Jedi Council never really has a problem with that, but I actually got to listen to Jedi Council because it was a podcast, and we'll talk more about that later. But I don't know. This week I was able to get pretty much everything in imaginable before we did this show. But yeah, that's the first thing that came to mind when it dropped. As
far as the basketball game goes, listen, it's one of the more fascinating things to see, and I think it happens probably more with Schmoes related content than it does with Collider related content, is that we can literally see things being birthed before our very eyes. I mean, the Schmoedown itself it came from just them doing this thing on the Schmoes No Live show, right? And it sort of developed into something else. Could this be the very first ever episode, I guess, if you will, or the very first event of the CBL, the Collider Basketball League? I think so. I think this is going to be a rivalry for the ages. I think the thing that I'm the most excited about is the production value that this could potentially be. We saw some technical discussion with Cody in terms of how it was going to work, how it was going to play out. But I love the fact that this rivalry was born out of something like the Schmoedown. And if you follow along with the drama and this and that of these two teams, Patriots and Top 10, that it can sort of bleed over into something else. I mean, even though this is a for fun sort of thing, this is a creative group of individuals that are trying to make it more of an event than it could have ever been. I mean, this could have just been them going out back and playing a pickup game of basketball, but the fact that they're going to potentially incorporate cameras, the fact that they're going to, have Ellis reffing, that there's a storyline with that, it's all great content, and I'm excited to see what more we actually get out of it when we do see it.
This is a healthy blend of a lot of things that I really enjoy, right? So you kind of add in this schmo-down dramatic element because it does involve two teams that have a really fun rivalry. It's a very timely match. It also reminds me of some of the videos that they used to do for Schmo Plus that maybe not behind the scenes might not be the best word, but they filmed things outside of a studio, and I think you and I have had discussions on here. We want Collider to go outside the building more. They sort of did it with Awesometacular. They definitely do it for comic book shopping. You and I have wanted to see that sort of expansion for a long time. So this has a lot of great elements to it, and I think if this is successful, and especially if they get people to come out to actually watch it, I think this is going to inform them of all the possibilities, and I hope it continues to keep them creative about this kind of stuff. I want to see more of it. This hasn't even happened yet, and I'm already just really excited and thinking about all of the ways that their gears can be turning if this turns out to be really successful. I want to know who you have on the game, because since I've been following Schmoes, I've heard all about Ellis and JTE playing ball. From the looks of it, I didn't know this until recently, but from the looks of it, Snyder seems to be a pretty consistent ball player. I might be wrong about that, but from what I hear, him and JTE play ball more than anybody. Then when you look at top 10, I know Matt Nost is a baller. I've never heard of Roca playing ball ever. And apparently, I can't remember who it was that said he was actually pretty good. It might have been Perry. It was Perry. She said that she played him one-on-one. But as far as I know, Roca is the least experienced player. I want top 10 to win. That's the team that I'm going to be cheerleading. But based on what I know, I think the Patriots have an advantage because apparently JTE is pretty good. So how did you interpret all of this, and who do you have on that game?
I mean, obviously, any sort of discussion about the actual game itself is speculative, considering the only real quote-unquote game tape we have is just by other individuals' accounts of how they actually perform. I've sort of been able to piece things together. Before I actually go into that, though, let me just say this before I forget about it. To go back on a conversation that we've had a few times already this year, in fact, it was a few weeks ago, Michael Rapaport. This man, we've been talking about incorporating him into Collider, the best ways to do that.
I'm sorry, I think he's calling in right now. Michael Rapaport, you're on After Schmoe.
There's only one way to incorporate you, Michael, into the... No, there's not one way to incorporate you. Probably the best way to incorporate you is via this basketball game or this league of some sort. He has got to be a commentator on this. He has to be. He's a huge basketball fan. He's constantly popping up on sports stuff on ESPN, this and that. He actually runs his own league. Is it like a 3-on-3 league that with like celebrities and retired basketball players?
I don't fucking know. How would I know that?
I can't remember. Well, I know because I'm an expert in all things.
You keep your ear to the ground when it comes to Michael Rapaport.
That's
I know.
Right. Check me out on my new after show that I'm doing for Michael Rapaport called the After Rap on the I Am Rapaport Stereo podcast
on the Collider Factory channel.
Exactly. So I think it would be fantastic to incorporate him into this as a commentator of some sorts. Anyways, back to the game itself. Yeah, listen, I don't know. It's kind of weird because I've heard people like JTE describe before being able to show up and and be hot or be not in terms of his field goal shooting and whatnot. But I don't know, man. That's all sort of interesting when you throw into account so many other variables into a game like this, like a crowd and things being on the line. Of course, you're going to be competitive when you play these pickup games and whatnot. But I don't know. I don't really look at that as being like, oh, JTE is good at basketball. Okay, he can shoot. That's great. But it seems like he and Matt Nost are going to be matched up against each other. Roka with the size advantage, man. I mean, he's a big guy. It seems like he's definitely a stocky individual. If he gets low, can do some blockout work, getting the rebounds, especially if these guys they don't get off of the blocks fast and they're hitting a lot of bricks and that they just can't seem to get the ball in the net. He's going to be the guy collecting those rebounds, it seems. So that's sort of the game that I look at. A lot of games are won and lost via defense. So I'm going to have to go with top 10 on a logical level and just a tactical level as well.
Yeah, the part that bums me out the most, and this isn't a Collider commentary, it's not a commentary on any of the players. It just sucks that it's 2-on-2. You know what I mean? Like, the matchup obviously makes sense. Like I said, you're bringing in that Schmoe down rivalry, but two on two doesn't involve all of the elements of playing basketball. Just having a 3-on-3 game gives you, there's more strategy to a game of 3-on-3. It highlights so many more aspects of that game. So I don't know. I would really love eventually if they did start their own intramural league, maybe with Screen Junkies or somebody. I actually want to see Ellis play ball more than anything, but it's a shame he doesn't get to play. If they were smart, if they thought about it, and I love Ellis and I think he'll do a good job reffing, but if they had thought about it a little bit more and it wasn't so stream of consciousness, Rapaport would have been the perfect ref. My God, a celebrity referee, Michael Rapaport, that would have been amazing.
Yeah, I agree. I think he would be a great ref, but I think at this point, seeing him as a commentator would be fantastic. Let's just have some fun. Who would be some other interesting sort of teams that you could see being formed? I mean, obviously you got a Cody and a Cobster. I think they've got a little bit of a size advantage. Schnepp might be a nice person to look at just because of how tall he is, but I don't know. I don't know what his shooting is like. I'm a tall guy myself, but God played a cruel joke on me. He made me tall and made me terrible at basketball. So I feel like John Schnepp and I share in that. What if Schnepp can just straight up ball? What if he is just like absolutely unreal at basketball?
I mean, I'm sure he'd be an amazing big man. I'm sure he's probably big enough to just sort of reach into the net and just toss the ball in.
Can Christian play basketball?
I don't know. I was thinking about that while you were talking. I was like,
he didn't really show his hand in that whole conversation.
I really like that. That's what I was thinking about as you were talking. I was thinking about, man, I actually would really love to see Ellis play, but could there be a Team Schmoes? I don't know how. Has he ever talked about playing anything? I mean,
no idea.
He's just a dad, right? Isn't that it?
He's just a dad.
I mean, isn't that it?
Wasn't Michael Jordan a dad? I mean, I don't know if that's...
Michael Jordan was Michael Jordan before he was a dad, right?
Yeah, they're all the same, though. The dads that play basketball,
That's racist.
Yeah, well, that's not how I meant it. I caught myself.
By the way, you just claimed that you were tall, but like 2 days ago, you said you didn't even realize you were tall when we were talking about it.
Allegedly, I'm tall. People proclaim that I'm tall.
Yeah, you have tall privilege and you don't know it because you've never had to worry about seeing over somebody at a show or a concert when I've had to deal with that my entire life.
You know how I feel about that, though? It's how I feel about most people that complain about things in life. When I have had that issue at a concert where I can't see something, you know what I do? I just move over.
Well, sure.
There's a lot of room.
It completely depends on the...
Just chill out, short man. Just go find another spot to stand.
It completely depends on the venue, the amount of people. It's like, you can't just say that for any... Anyway.
Well, sure you can.
The last thing, the other thing that we missed, speaking of God playing cruel jokes, Easter was April
Drake?
Fool's Day.
Oh, sorry.
That was actually a really damn good segue. The April Fool's videos. We didn't know that these were coming, and man, they were a fun surprise. We had the top 100 sandwiches, and what were the other ones? I'm forgetting them off the top of my head.
You had Ghost Talk.
Ghost Talk,
and
yes.
You had the Schmoedown VR, and I feel like there's one other one that I'm forgetting. Listen, I thought these were fantastic. Like, I thought that they were done so cleverly. I don't know for a fact, but I'm just going to speculate. I have a strange feeling that these were the work, or at least mastermind, by Cody and Cobster. How do you feel about that?
I assumed that 100%. You know how I know that I'm the the host of After Schmoe?
Dennis is going to be pretty annoyed we're not giving him any credit for this.
Well, nobody tells us anything. That's the beauty of this job. We can just say whatever the hell we want. I have never felt more host of After Schmoe than I did when watching these videos, because these videos were released on April Fool's Day. They came out as a joke. You're not supposed to take them seriously, but because we're talking about them, I was thinking about them just like anything else. So I put like my judgment cap on. So I was like, oh, I would have done this differently. And I felt bad doing that. There's no way you did that right. I mean, that's what separates me from you.
That's just not true. I watched these, and the only real judgment I had was just by taking in the content and sort of assessing how entertained I was by it. So I thought they were all really funny. Like, they were really, really well done. I thought the sandwich video had fantastic comedic timing, and how it was edited was fantastic.
You know what's brilliant about the top 100 sandwich video? They could have easily sat down and just told Emma, like, look, hey, give me 30 seconds on sandwiches. They didn't do that. They did it a little bit, especially, and that's one of the reasons why I think Cody and Cobster were at the front of these videos, because the portions where Cody was speaking, he was clearly doing the sandwich bit. So I can just imagine Cobster, maybe Thad behind the camera doing that, maybe Joey. But that's, I think, why you think those guys were heavily involved in this. But the brilliance of that video is that the commentary wasn't actually entirely about sandwiches. They spliced in pundits from other videos. That way they were so passionately talking about a movie, yet it was edited as if they were talking about sandwiches. And I thought that was a brilliant comedic touch.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, that was just what I was taking in while I was watching it. It was just how well executed it was. Then I look at something like the Ghost Talk portion. I thought that was done really, really well too. I didn't sit through the entire thing like in normal speed, like watching every single second that happened. I sort of was, I put it on like a fast forward mode and let it play through and saw the little minor details. I saw some really quick frames that they were throwing in there, some kind of creepy frames that I thought was also fantastic and great. Again, going back to Coder and Coder? Who is Coder? It's a hybrid of Cody and Cobster. Those two are known for not only their sort of side hustle they do making short films and whatnot, but also how into horror stuff they are. And that's sort of why, another reason that sort of supported why I think they had a lot to do with this. I just thought it was really, really well done. A nice little touch. Again, even though we don't know exactly who had a hand in all of this, I just feel like it was people behind the scenes that don't normally get to do things like this. And it was just a really, really nice touch if that was the case.
I am ready to come up to this week. I know we want to explain this podcast network to everybody and make sure we sort of cover all of that, because I think people still have questions, and it's not, I think Christian did a good job, but I think there were some things that were left out, or there are still some things that are leaving people confused. So that's why we want to explain the podcast network even further with what you and I know. But was there anything that happened throughout the week with the programming that stuck out to you?
You know what? I just feel like we're so into this new model of Collider. We're so into this new programming that everything just feels so comfortable now. I feel like they've really hit their stride. I did want to bring up before we do get into that, actually before we get into the podcast talk, I do want to mention that the discussion of Harloff and Ellis from this week, it's Thursday when we're recording this, so yesterday's episode that came out, because so much of it at the top was so heavy in the podcast talk, we're sort of going to use that as a measuring stick in terms of recapping some of the stuff that they talked about there, bringing it into the podcast discussion. I also would want to talk about Mark and Christian sort of being in a spat with each other and just kind of throwing little stabs and jabs at one another. But anyways, this week's programming for me was important to watch for the sole fact that this is a very, very important time for Collider, I think, in my opinion, because we always talk about these different big milestones throughout the year, things like Comic-Con, things like Star Wars Celebration, which obviously I know that that's not happening all the time. But we also look at the calendar year of movies that are coming out, and just because so many big films, especially big films to this space in particular, comic book movies, Star Wars movies, etc., are so clustered together, it is important that the entire crew be on their A game, and I think they absolutely have, both in their on-screen appearances and the types of discussions that they've had, but also in just breaking news. They have really turned up the breaking news videos to an 11. If on a scale of 1 to 10, they're on an 11, and I love these videos coming out and how often they're putting them out. Do you have anything to say in regards to any of that?
I don't. I mean, I agree. I thought we talked about that a little bit last week.
We have.
Yeah.
Well, a little bit, and we've also touched on these important moments throughout the year for Collider. I just feel like we're seeing it right before our very eyes, specifically because, yes, we can get episodes of Movie Talk where they talk about Marvel stuff and they talk about Star Wars stuff, but we are literally on the horizon of all of those movies and Deadpool, and it just seems like they're so relevant. The conversations are so relevant, and the anticipation for them. And it's so important for them to ride that wave of anticipation to be sort of an outlet for the fans to actually invest that energy back into programming like this.
I actually spoke too soon. I didn't realize that they just put out an episode of Collider Ladies Night before we hit record with the Blockers director Kay Cannon. I'm super excited to watch that because of Blockers, and they had this unusual excitement about that movie, and it kind of got me really, really excited to see everybody so high on that film. So I can't wait to see that and see what Kay Cannon is all about. And but yeah, you're absolutely right. I'm just looking, and all of the Spielberg videos seem like they're crossing that 20,000 mark. I think that's still the goal for all that kind of stuff. Can't wait to see Jaws drop tomorrow. The Schmoedown is still doing well. People act like it's not. I thought it was really intriguing that
I love how you just like nonchalantly just were like, everybody over there freaking out about the Schmoedown, just chill out. Like you just literally threw them aside. I love it because I agree. The people just need to just relax. Actually, we do need to bring up one thing about the Schmoedown. Christian had his impromptu carpool thing, which we'll also go into the podcast discussion, but he did announce on there, whether he was supposed to or not, the next live event, the main event for the live event being a triple threat match, a Star Wars match between Ken Knapsack, his co-host on his Star Wars show. What's that guy's name? I forget his name off the top of my head.
Joseph Scrimshaw.
Joseph Scrimshaw. And then who was the third individual? Was it the guy Alex from Star Wars Explained? Is that right?
I don't remember.
I believe that's who it was, but
it was a very average, normal white guy name. That's all I remember.
Regardless, that match, I mean, you know, I'm a relatively casual fan. I've told people that before, but I've made no bones about the fact that I think the Star Wars Schmoedown matches are a complete avenue into, you know, getting new people into the Schmoedown, especially if there is like a threshold that they're sort of hitting. Just dropping a Star Wars match is just going to instantly give a jolt of energy into the league. And I think it's great that they're using it as a main event for the Schmoedown. I'm excited for the match.
So let's go on and transition into the return of Harpool, because that's where all of this podcast network stuff began. It was pretty curious to me that the news broke via Carpool. I mean, I assume that they all knew and were anticipating and were ready to do it on Collider anyway, because they did put out that launch announcement video earlier. But it was curious and interesting that he brought back Harpool to make that announcement, because as soon as I saw the notification, I thought, oh, here we go. Here's another rundown video, or Schmoedown videos. I just fucked up my joke. But no, Christian turned on Facebook Live to explain the network launch. Was that curious at all to you that they delivered it that way? Does it matter?
So, I mean, I guess if we're going to get a little bit meta here and get a little bit behind the scenes, this is something that we knew about it to a certain extent, like a little bit before.
Well, they talked about it on the town hall.
Yeah, and we knew about it a little bit before that, just that's something that Christian's always wanted to do, right? He's talked about that with us before, like, yes, a podcast network is something that I would love to do, obviously coming from a podcast background.
Ever since you and I came up with that idea on this show, he's been wanting to do it. So.
That's right. And it was just kind of strange because as things were kind of getting finalized, because we knew that there would potentially be an opportunity on the feed for us, which we were very excited about, and we're kind of waiting on pins and needles to see what that was going to be. He had sort of talked to us about, finalizing that. Are we interested in it? This and that. And of course we were interested in it, but it was just kind of strange that the next day he announced it when it still felt to me like we were still like ironing out details. But I was just like, all right, let's just fucking go with it. Which is kind of the guy that Christian is. It's kind of what Christian does sometimes, right? He kind of, once that ball gets rolling downhill, I think the excitement, the heat of the moment, he's just like, fuck it, let's just do it.
Yeah, because right now, even after the announcement, we still have questions. Like,
yes,
there's a lot of things I need to talk to him about, but here we are. We're starting next week. So.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, we're working out art right now with Brian Ward, which I'm very excited for. There's been some correspondence there. I've mentioned like we're still ironing out very technical details, like who do we submit the podcast to, like stuff like that.
I'm gonna say this on air because I want it documented, and because this is a direct line to everybody over there. I have loved pretty much every experience. There's some interesting moments in After Schmoe history, but for the most part, I've loved every interaction that I've ever had with the cast and crew over there. I hope to God they give us the ability to upload the show ourselves. That way it's done the way that we want it to.
Yeah.
That would be something I would look forward to. But who knows if that's going to happen. They seem to be. I noticed that Jedi Council came up like promptly at 5 o'clock. That's when it comes out on YouTube. It seemed like the podcast version was ready almost instantly as well. I got to listen to it very promptly. So I don't know. Maybe part of that podcast network is I guess it's like anything else. There's going to be a time for all of that stuff to drop. So maybe it's going to be a lot faster and more prompt for that.
Yeah, I mean, just to dive even deeper down the rabbit hole and give everybody else a little bit of behind-the-scenes stuff. So I think one of the things I'm the most excited about with this podcast network and the fact that we are involved with it is just because a lot of this video stuff that they're putting out on Collider, like, it obviously feels new and it feels fresh, but the podcast network is the first thing that they're really doing that's a little bit more outside of the box, I think. And the fact that they're putting so much time and energy into it, it's a little bit surreal, I think, just to be involved with it. But it's also just like incredibly, incredibly exciting. Like, this is 100% the thing that Collider is doing right now, pushing on all fronts this podcast network. And that's how it should be done. That's exactly how it should be done. Because and we'll get into this in just a second, but believe it or not, as many podcasts that exist out there, there is still a ton of white space to be filled, a lot of blank spaces to be filled, especially for Collider. I mean, and they've seen the space, they've decided to move into it, and it's super smart and it's exciting. The behind the curtain thing that I wanted to share with people is the fact that it is a little bit strange because Ryan and I, we pretty much have our fingers on every single thing that we do. The editing of our podcast, the structuring of our podcast, the naming of our podcast, the graphics of our podcast, everything on sight and sound is all done ourselves. So it is a little,
the music that we have.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Everything is from us. We're very DIY in that regard. So it is a little bit strange to let other people do things, and I think that's understandable. I'm completely fine with it. I'm excited for it just because I'm excited for the opportunity. But our control freak nature about certain aspects of it, and our quality control too, that's one thing that I appreciate about all this stuff is people saying such nice things about our audio quality, and that's something that we take a lot of pride in. But it's a little bit stressful to just let go of some things, I think.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, that's actually not the thing I'm most stressed out about, but yeah, there's certainly that too. So thanks for reminding me of that. Okay, let's talk about this announcement. I think there were a lot of people asking questions in the carpool chat, and Christian couldn't get to him just because he's driving and he wasn't able to acknowledge them all. So I was trying to, and you were also in there. I think we were trying to answer some of those questions to kind of help them out. But people still have questions. They put out that announcement video, and like I said, I think they've done a pretty good job explaining it. But I also remembered you and I have known about this for a while, and we understand it. So I wanted to make sure that we sort of iron out, to use your term, iron out all of the concerns that people may have. And I think we're also going to be able to be the voice because, you know, we have an audience with the people at Collider, Fernandez and Christian. Hopefully Ellis tunes in this week. Love you, buddy. These guys are going to listen to mine and Jay's conversation, and they will be able to answer these questions publicly, or maybe get back to us so that we can reiterate them to you. But I think the best way to start this, and this is just me explaining the network. So moving forward, the podcast network is not replacing anything. I think there are people who are wondering, are some of the YouTube shows being lifted from YouTube to go to the podcast network? No, that's not the case. So the idea is that the Collider Podcast Network is a new side to Collider. It's a new branch of Collider, if you will. It's going to be this running organism, and it will share the same flagship shows that you are familiar with. So you know that we have the Movie Talk feed, Heroes, Jedi Council, and those are the big three. And I really liked Christian's term on Carpool. He called it also has the ability to be a farm system, right? So anytime anybody has a brand new idea for a show, and if they want to test the waters because they don't know if they should put in the resources, the time to produce such a show on the YouTube channel, if they want to test something out, they can make it a podcast and see how it does. And if it does really well, it has a big audience, then they might transfer it to YouTube because the podcast network will have validated that show. So it's brilliant in that way. That's what the Collider Factory feed is for. So that's the brand. That's one of those ideas that's sort of brand new, and I think people don't fully understand it yet.
Real quick,
go ahead. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Let me jump in on one thing that you said, because you kind of drew a line from factory to YouTube, but there's something else that's thrown out in that whole system, right? So you've got Collider Factory, and I think there was some confusion about what Factory was or what it was going to be specifically, because there was a lot of repeat episodes or copy episodes. Like movie talk showed up on multiple feeds, or on Factory's feed and Movie Talk's feed. I think maybe for a day or two, maybe. And
it's still confusing because even the shows that they.
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
And it's still kind of confusing because even after this podcast network announcement, they're still putting Movie Talk and stuff on that feed. I know it's going to change, I think, tomorrow, but the past day or so since this announcement, they were still kind of doing it. So,
Yeah, all of that is, in my opinion, probably just down to technical logistics and whatnot. Anytime a podcast pops up on iTunes, it can do some wacky things. Like iTunes in general, things show up a little bit later than it would on a typical RSS feed, which is a whole other thing, and I'll talk about that in just a second. But it was my understanding that Factory, and this is sort of how I wrapped my head around it even before we got the announcement of what Collider Factory is going to be. If you think about what a factory does, it builds things, and that's what that is supposed to be, a building ground for new shows and new ideas. Because if you develop a new show and just throw it up on its own feed and just rely on word of mouth and promotion on the network, you're not really giving a show everything that it could potentially need to be successful. However, if you give it a built-in audience, much like SK Plus did for this show and so many of the other shows on SK Plus, it gave it a built-in audience, a platform, if you will, to build the show up. It was of my understanding that if a show was successful there, it would then get its own podcast feed to sort of live there to see if it can perform. Christian even threw out a very interesting idea that potentially a podcast, if it wasn't doing well on a specific feed, that it could potentially be relegated back to Factory, which is interesting.
Yeah, sort of. I did skip a step. I went from Factory straight to YouTube. I forgot to mention that it could be its own podcast.
And one-on-one is sort of going to be the interesting one to look at. Obviously, it has Christian's name attached to it, and I think anybody that had their own individual name attached to it would have some leverage on an audience, but it's the only show, with the exception of the Schmoedown, I guess, it's the only show that just has never existed before. And it's going to start as its own feed. It's going to be very interesting to see what that looks like, right? To see if without something to support it, other than just guests and Christian himself, if that can sustain the sort of growth that they're expecting it to. I think it will. I'm not saying that it won't, but it will be interesting to see if that's the case.
I'm still panicking because I have Instagram up and Christian posted a picture of the iTunes rankings, and oh Jesus Christ, we're gonna be on the #1 TV film podcast.
We already talked about that.
Yeah, but I'm just now seeing the image and it's setting in.
Let's talk for a second.
Hold on. I wanted to mention the fact you brought up one-on-one. One-on-one is going to be totally fine because it's number 6 on that ranking. So it's interesting because actually the thing that's interesting about one-on-one, when people asked me about it originally, I was like, oh, Christian, it's probably going to be similar to what he did with Harloff Podcast, but it's going to be more about people of interest in Hollywood, more celebrity types. But he was like, no. He adjusted that, and he's like, look, yeah, I'm gonna have my conversations with Stephen DeKnight and Dan Fogler, but Tiffany Smith, Alicia Malone, like people you're familiar with from Collider and this space as well, can be my guests. So I thought that was pretty cool. But it's also funny because now that I'm thinking about it, some of those people actually are big time celebrities. Like Alicia Malone is a massive personality. I saw her Filmstruck podcast banner was on the front page of iTunes podcasts, and she runs that streaming service. So she's a huge personality. So she's even though she's family, she's still a huge get for that show. So but yeah, I just thought that was an important thing to mention.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of my favorite things is I hope that Christian can show Beardo how to do a show long form for a long time with guests on there and whatnot, that you can interview anybody on an interview show. It doesn't just have to be people at Collider. I love Beardo, though. I do miss Don't Be a Beardo.
Do you?
Yeah, to a certain extent I do. So right. One interesting thing that happened with the announcement of this is something that you and I are very, very aware of, okay? So podcasts in general, they've existed for a while now. They're a part of the overall zeitgeist, but the concept of them is still relatively new, and it's something that not everybody has wrapped their head around. Right. I saw a lot of questions about this that, to you and I, who have been doing podcasting for a really, really long time, it seems like kind of no-brainer sort of answers that we would have to give, but I'm very quick to just write off somebody that doesn't understand it, because there are still so many people out there that don't really understand what a podcast is or the ins and outs of it. There were people asking, well, do these podcasts cost money? The answer is, the short answer is no. There is money involved in terms of hosting and whatnot, but not really. I mean, it's essentially free. Some people might be confused about all of this iTunes talk. Period. I
think you just kind of confuse people. To the consumer, these podcasts are free.
Right. They're free to access.
We don't have to worry about money.
Right. Absolutely. Yes. They're free to access for anybody to watch, just the same as YouTube content is. I saw some people confused with all this iTunes talk. I saw a few people mention the fact that, well, I don't use iTunes to listen to podcasts, so will I be able to listen to these? And iTunes is honestly just used as a measuring stick for podcasts. Like we keep talking about these podcasting charts. It's a huge deal that these are popping up there. Don't ask how they are, because not everybody really understands how podcasts show up on podcast charts, but it is a very big deal because it allows a lot of people to have eyes on them. Even though a lot of these feeds don't have any shows on them yet, they can still pop up on these feeds just by your ratings and reviews on iTunes, which is very, very important. Even if you don't use iTunes to listen to the podcast, you don't have to, but it is still very crucial and important for you to go to all of these feeds and support the network by giving a rating and review.
Right. So I don't know exactly how Podcast One works. I know that the Schmoes Know podcast feed goes through Podcast One. And again, to kind of let you behind the curtain a little bit, anytime I've ever wanted stats on how well After Schmoe does on the Schmoes Know feed, Christian isn't able to just go look it up. He has to contact someone at Podcast One, and that's a different experience. With me and Jay, we host our podcast through Podbean, which is also an app that you can probably access all these Collider shows. But Jay and I can access that stuff immediately, whereas they have some deal worked out, and I don't know the extent of it. I don't know exactly how that works. And the reason why I'm bringing this up is because a lot of people were asking on the topic of what apps can I use to listen to. Spotify, you have to submit, like Collider, Fernandez, Christian, whoever, maybe Podcast One, has to submit their feed to Spotify, and Spotify has to approve it. So that is an extra step on their part. I don't know if they've even considered it. Maybe they've already done it. It does take time for Spotify to approve that. We ran into that same thing when we added Sight and Sound to Spotify. It might take a long time, so they might have already done it. If they haven't done it already, please, Christian, Fernandez, whoever's running this, submit to Spotify, submit to Stitcher. A lot of people listen to your shows on Stitcher, and again, that might be coming. It might just be taking longer for them to. They're still figuring out the entire podcast network in general, but I just want everybody to be thinking about that. I have an Android phone. The app that I use is called Pocket Cast. If you just look up podcasts in your app store, podcast apps, there are several of them that you can choose from. Most of them are free, and you can get all these shows. So if you don't have iTunes or an iPhone, that's fine. You can find them virtually anywhere. And of course, if you have an iPhone, you have iTunes, and you don't, or Apple Podcasts, I should say, that's the name of the app. Then you don't have to worry about that anyway. Am I missing anything on that front?
I don't think so. I mean, the last thing that I sort of want to touch on from a technical perspective is that if some of this stuff is new to you and you only check out Collider content via YouTube, that's perfectly fine. You're obviously going to be able to get a lot of content still, and the content that you know and love via their YouTube channel. But I'm a big fan of whatever I am a fan of. I'm a big supporter of engrossing yourself in the entire world. Now, I've talked a lot before about there's people out there that try to take in every single bit of Collider content, which seems to be more and more difficult as time goes on because there's so much content out there to take in from Collider, which is a good problem to have. But I think in a year, people who don't get get in on the ground level of some of this podcast stuff are going to be missing out on just a huge chunk. We've been huge champions of this whole idea for a long time, whether or not we were going to be involved with it or not. But this is going to be a very big thing. And I'm excited, man. Do you want to move on to maybe some other discussion here with the podcast feed, some speculation on what else we could potentially see?
I do. I did want to touch on our buddy, our good friend Andy Evans was talking to me earlier, and he was asking, what do I have to... I usually listen to podcasts, your podcasts, on my PS4 through the YouTube app. So, again, I would push these guys to maybe add an additional Collider channel. I highly doubt they would bog down the main channel with all these additional shows. I would hope that they add a new channel. I think what might be confusing or tricky is that Movie Talk is obviously on the main channel. So basically this additional podcast YouTube channel would have pretty much everything else. I personally don't think that's confusing, but it might be a reason why they don't do it, or it might actually confuse somebody else. So we'll see. But I hope that they put this up on YouTube, because you and I have the philosophy, we think that podcasts should just be anywhere, everywhere, accessible, any way that people can get to them. But we'll see how they maneuver with that.
It seems like that's going to be the case, too, simply because I think the Schmoes themselves are individuals that, I don't know about pioneered that whole movement about putting podcasts, whether or not there's video or not, on there. Yeah. Onto YouTube, but I could easily see a second feed existing and some of this auxiliary content that's not on video, like a lot of the Collider Factory stuff, the stuff from Collider.com,
right?
Our show, Schmoedown Rundown, which is another SK Plus show that's moving over to Collider, and congratulations to them as well. Everybody involved with that, yeah. It's. I think the deal still has to be nailed down.
I was going to say, I talked to Frank, and he wasn't totally sure yet.
Christian at least extended the olive branch, so to speak. But if Rundown was going to come over, I would see it living on that feed as well.
Sure.
And just what other shows might exist. Now, let's talk about other shows, because we don't have in terms of brand new shows. The only brand new show that will exist, or brand new shows that will exist, to my knowledge, with this podcast network, is One-on-One with Christian Harloff, and Our Show, which is essentially just the same show ported over, rebranded, etc. Am I missing anything?
Oh yeah, you're missing a big one.
Okay.
And for one, I do want to make sure that I'm going to be paying attention to the comment section. Jay usually pays attention to the comment section. So if you have any questions that you want answered promptly about the podcast network, Jay and I will be watching the comment section of this episode of After Schmoe on YouTube. So feel free to ask any questions you might have about all of this.
Are you about to announce my Collider Vaping show?
The big show that you're missing is Collider Live.
Yeah, but see, I wasn't even going to put... I was more or less talking about specific podcast content.
I just want to talk about Collider Live. Is that okay?
Sure, yeah, we can.
Listen. Jay, you and I have been in the Facebook group, comment sections, on here talking about the live show coming back. It's back. Starting June, or I think he said June or May, you can expect Collider Live to hit the interwebs. And I was so stoked for that, because even though I knew it was coming, I was still shocked by the announcement for whatever reason, because I didn't think that it would drop right then and there, but also Christian informed us of things that you and I didn't even know about. That got me even more excited about what Collider Live can be. What was your reaction when he dropped that bomb?
Yeah, I was really, really excited by the entire thing. The format, the fact that it was essential. Let's not really beat around the bush here. I mean, this is the live show, the Schmoes Know live show, essentially much like After Schmoe being ported over to Collider. It's going to have a different feel. It's going to have a slightly different vibe, a little bit of an updated vibe, in the same way that every single phase of the Schmoes Know live show kind of had a different, updated vibe to it. And I like it, man. I saw some people being a little bit weary of this whole thing.
Of course.
Yeah, I saw a few people that were like, there was one person in Carpool that was like, oh, well, it just seems like they're kind of ditching the live show and or ditching Schmoes Know and only focusing on Collider. Let me just address this right now. That's just simply not the case. Collider is starting fresh without Complex. They need as much interesting content as they can. I could easily see Fernandez saying something like, hey, let's bring this over. Let's do this. The benefits of doing it this way is, one, having an even bigger audience to show yourself to, and also the fact that they can do the show on Collider under Collider's roof, benefiting Collider benefiting Schmoes. And maybe, I don't know this one for 100% fact, but maybe they don't have to cover all the same costs like they were with the Schmoes Know live show. You know, the live show, they had to pay people. They had to keep people there and to do the show. And by doing it this way, it just seems like a more mutually beneficial sort of thing that's taking place that works well for all parties. And just because it has a different name to it, doesn't mean that it benefits the Schmoes any less.
Right.
And the other thing with that is the fact that so many people that you know and love and have missed are going to be coming back. So I don't see how you could be anything but excited and optimistic about this.
People, I think, a lot of people, not everybody, they're mad at the label of it. They're mad at the name. They're mad at the branding of it and the fact that it's moving channels. But call me a shill all you want, and maybe you assumed I was going to take this stance. But does it matter? It doesn't matter. No, well, sorry. It sounded like I said it doesn't matter, and then I wanted to correct myself, but I just realized it's the same thing. It's
okay
when he's speaking. When Christian explains the show to you, it was familiar to me. As far as I was concerned, the live show was back. Now, I started this podcast 2 years ago. I am sort of a late bloomer when it comes to coming in on... I mean, I came in pretty late, and I think that's why Christian liked us doing the history lessons. I will not be taking history lessons to Collider Afterthoughts, but that's why he liked us to do those, because we certainly were not as seasoned as some of the other listeners, as some of the other fans. But Phase 6 is my Schmoes Know show. And to my knowledge, and I guess you can correct me, but to my knowledge, I don't remember anybody having a problem with Collider picking up the Schmoes Know live show. I know for a fact, because I have revisited old episodes, that the Collider version, the Schmoes Know show, when they dropped movie show, the Schmoes Know show was different than previous iterations, and they've done that like 6 times. I just said Phase 6, and now they might call this Phase 7 if they wanted to, even though it's not Schmoes anymore. They've been evolving, they've been changing, and I don't remember an audience of people back then that had a problem with it. So I'm asking, why are people still doing it when Christian and Mark have continued to prove that their attitudes about this show haven't gone away? What am I missing?
I think everything that you said is very, very valid, and I think it's important to just address in general. To be fair, I did take as much of a temperature as I would with situations like this, and it was very, very limited. I don't want people who weren't involved with the conversations to misconstrue this and think that, oh, here we go, we're back to doomsday level again. This wasn't that at all. Like, there were a handful of people at best that I saw have these interactions like this, but it's okay. It's okay.
We're still covering that ground because it is part of the fandom. Yeah.
Absolutely, it's completely okay to have this conversation because it does need to be had. I think some people might have been a little bit weary about Mark's inclusion in all of this. Mark's inclusion into this show is no different than it was for a lot of Phase 6. I mean, there was many times when Mark had to sit out. In fact, you can go all the way back to Toad Hop days. There were times when Mark had to sit out on a lot of Toad Hop shows because he was traveling and doing stand-up. He's still going to be included in the show as much as he can, in the same way that he's always been included in the show as much as he can. And for a huge chunk of when After Schmoe with Ryan and myself started, Christian was missing. So that's nothing new. It seems like this is the best version of what people could want. The only thing that's different is the title is different. It's just rebranded.
When we started this conversation, I talked about some of the new stuff that Christian mentioned that I didn't know about that got me even more excited. Bringing in Roxy as like what seems to be like the full-time co-host, that is such a smart move, man. That was music to my ears, because not only is Roxy an incredible talent, but yes, she can fill those shoes. She can do such a great job. And we have talked about Collider sort of pioneering this movement and sort of challenging the rest of the industry to implement these incredible talents. And this is just more evidence of them doing that, and I just think it's great. And I do think, unless Ellis, really picks up he does stand up still moderately, I think. Like, he just announced tour dates. I feel like he hasn't gone out in a while. It's sort of random to me. So I think people,
at least traveling, right? That's
sure,
specifically what you mean.
Right. I think that Ellis is still going to have plenty of opportunities. And so when he's still sitting in that chair having Christian, Ellis, and Roxy there doing the show, that is great. And that's one of the main reasons why I'm excited. Yeah,
I think it's incredibly intriguing, too, just to see how the rest of the Collider audience reacts to this. I mean, listen, let's be completely honest. This is a big thing for something that Mark and Christian have developed over the years. This is a platform in the same way that Collider Factory is a platform. The SK Plus has been a platform. I am very excited because this show, at least, and you know what is even more exciting to me is for us to be able to support them in that regard too, with our inclusion on the Movie Talk feed and new people listening to us.
Oh God,
being able to champion this every single week as the shills that we are, to be able to actually support this and sort of explained, because this is going to be so new, so fresh to people, because it's going to feel so different, that we're going to be able to translate it for a lot of new people. And Matt, I mean, let's just remember, and we can have this conversation again the week before we get Collider Live, but people need to know that it is a little bit, that first show is going to be so crazy. I already know it. It's going to be off the rails, and it's going to be like something no one has ever seen before on Collider, and it's going to be exciting. But it is challenging to come into a room with so many people, so many personalities, but they are just going to do such an amazing job. And everybody out there listening in Schmoeville also needs to be great stewards to some of these new people who will be experiencing this for the first time.
And the reason why we have conversations like this is because we try our best to examine all of, like you said, taking the temperature of the group, of the fandom, and we try to bring all of that in and discuss it. And I guess people use the term shills when describing us, but I think we approach it, we just try to be reasonable. We just try to relax. We just try to be patient. And, people like to throw out, well, you always know more than we do, but that also, factors in, that does still factor in to mine and Jay's conversations. That's why we stress, like, when we think you should be at ease with some of this stuff and just to wait and see, we mean it. So I think one of the things, and if people don't always get things, they don't always hear what bums us out. One of the things that bothered me for a moment was sort of how, and we can use this to transition into Harloff and Ellis, but one of the things that bummed me out when you talk about people that might be missing out on Mark Ellis in all of this, in the Collider Live stuff. It did bum me out to see Mark being so clueless about some of the things that were going on, and the reason why I felt bummed out about it for a moment.
Clueless is kind of a strong word. So not clueless, just sort of like.
I mean, I'm not making fun of him. I'm just saying
didn't
that
have the understanding that Christian had, because Christian sort of had a roadmap.
No, I'm not calling Ellis dumb. I'm just stating that Ellis or Harloff pretty much had to lay it all out for him,
right?
And because Ellis, what bummed me out is it did feel like for a moment that Ellis wasn't as much of a part of like the structuring of all this, but I thought about it for a minute, and I sat back and remembered that Ellis is part-time. Ellis doesn't want to be in any of these meetings, and a part-time employee just doesn't have the same, I don't know if privilege is the word, but he's just not going to be doing everything that Christian is going to be doing, because Christian is a top dog there. So it bummed me out for a little bit, but once you realize that it is sort of a different role, Ellis is 100% committed to movie talk, and he slays on that show. You just sort of remember their roles a little bit better. And knowing Ellis the way that I do, I don't think Ellis doesn't care. He doesn't want to be in that studio any more than he has to be. He just goes in, does his job, and leaves. He wears basketball shorts below his blazer. Like, Ellis is just that kind of guy. But I guess I'm bringing this up because I understand why people might feel like Ellis isn't included.
Right.
But it's not as malicious as you might think it is. That's the only reason why I wanted to bring it up. But we can transition if you want.
Real quick, let me just sort of bookend this whole podcast conversation. I'll bring up something that I was a little bit apprehensive about myself. Of course, where we view this stuff from afar, of course, we might have a little bit more of inside knowledge than some people because we have to do this show, and we like to bring you guys some interesting tidbits of news. But even though we knew about the podcast feed and sort of how it would work, when it was very, very first announced, Ryan and I both had a conversation off air that we couldn't quite wrap our heads around it, and it was a little bit different than what we had sort of, I think, sort of thought it was going to be right away. And I was sort of frustrated that all these feeds existed on their own, and that this other feed was sort of this thing that we didn't know what it was going to be, considering it was the most established. I thought about it more, what it could be. Again, analyzed the name Collider Factory, that this was going to be the proving ground for new shows and this and that. And then I finally sort of wrapped my head around all of that stuff and made sense of it all. I couldn't have been proven any more dumb or of an idiot than to think to myself that these feeds would ever struggle, considering they're now sitting at number 1, 2, and 3 on the TV and Film podcast chart. I mean, it's remarkable. It's amazing. And hats off to everybody that has already gone and subscribed and rated and reviewed. The last thing that I want to say about this podcast feed and this stuff, and to sort of relate it to Ellis, his involvement in all of this, at least in the planning stages of it, it is what it is. It's said, it's done. We can move on from that. But if Ellis wants his own show in the Collider Podcast Network, he will have that opportunity to do so. Yeah. In fact, it seems to me, I saw a random, I've never seen this before, and I don't specifically know why it was done here, but Mark Fernandez posting sort of like a job posting on Twitter looking for somebody in the marketing realm to hire for Collider. Seems like they're focusing more on really sort of outfitting their back office staff, people in the realm of marketing and PR and maybe even like accounting and this and that. Some people that you won't see in front of the camera as much.
I'll be there.
And I think with that being the case, with that being their primary focus, I think we need to start looking at some of the on-screen talent that we do know. People like who aren't necessarily represented having their own shows. People like Mark Riley, people like Perry, and even people like Roca to a certain extent. are they going to be developing podcasts? Are they going to go home tonight after this announcement and think like, what can I do to help Collider out and help myself out, and what can I develop for this Collider factory? I don't know if that's what they're thinking, but I think it's something they definitely need to be thinking about, because this is a playground for people to come into and develop content and develop new shows. Maybe it works, maybe it doesn't, but you've got to at least try. I'm excited to see what comes down the pipe, but I'm also very excited to see what this creative group of individuals has up their sleeve to entertain us. Maybe we'll be talking about Perry's new show or Mark Ellis's new show on our show in the coming months.
Well said. I'm already working on guests, by the way, for Collider Afterthoughts, so stay tuned. I know we didn't do a whole lot of guests on here, but yeah, I'm thinking a lot about how we're going to do this new show. I don't think it's going to be as different as people might think, but we will change up a few things.
Let's after we do Harloff and Ellis, let's just close the show with just a little bit of discussion on some new things we're going to do with Afterthoughts.
Okay. Let's talk about Harloff and Ellis real quick. What do you got?
What's wrong with Harloff and Ellis?
You want to know what I think is wrong with Harloff and Ellis?
Yeah.
I think I'm going to be giving Christian ammo the next time he does Carpool, because he's still upset about my Schmoedown comments, but I don't want their like bickering and argument at the top to be redundant. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Okay. Listen, I love these guys with all my heart. I'm very grateful for the things that they do, and they've been doing this for a long time. When I say OG pioneers of this space, I legitimately mean it. I mean,
10 years.
The proof is in the pudding. And I love watching this show. I love pudding, and especially a nice butterscotch pudding.
You love cliches as well.
That's right. You got to outfit your discussion with cliches every now and then. Okay,
sure,
that's fine. So,
okay,
just relax. You're stressed out right now.
Yes, I am.
Harloff and Ellis is a great show. I love these conversations because it's something that we don't get between the two of them throughout the years as much. I mean, you have to go back to the very, very, very early days of the Schmoe movie show, the podcast, to get these one-on-one conversations. And, you know, I get it. These guys have been doing their job for a long time. They work together. They bicker. They have little things. Listen, I don't like Ryan Snelling. I don't like him at all. But when we come on air, we act like we like each other. Gosh darn it, okay? Just show up and do that. No, I'm just kidding. I love you.
Or we just got an email about the show. I'm curious to read it after we start recording. No, I was going to say, I was going to use what?
Hang on, real quick. This whole thing, the bickering. You guys made me a little bit uncomfortable. The whole mommy and daddy, the mommy and daddy fighting thing, like that's a joke. It happened in a live show, like it's a funny thing, and in the controlled chaos, so much can happen to distract from it. But this one, like, there was so much at the beginning that I was just like, guys, please stop. This is like, I had to pause it at one point, and like my girlfriend had to console me. Like, they're arguing too much. It's upsetting. It's upsetting me. It's upsetting my dogs.
Kayla was like, do they really like each other? And you had to, explain, well, these guys have been together. They've been working together for too long. And
yeah, I did have to explain it to her. She doesn't listen to After Schmoe. So
what's wrong with her?
I don't know. She's a busy woman.
Okay.
She runs her own business. Anyways. Yeah, it was just like, it was a lot, and that's not even really a criticism. That's more of just like my subjective thing of dealing with it. Like, I was like, guys, please just live one another, love each other. Let's hug it out.
I'm gonna use Christian's own advice for After Schmoe. Sprinkle it throughout the show. What they were doing, and maybe bickering isn't the word.
I hope to God they talk about this next week.
Oh, I hope so too. But it's just been a couple of times that they start off and they just kind of step on each other's toes, and it just like it's just kind of exhausting isn't the word, but I don't know if I like it. I don't like seeing them fight. I would much rather Christian laugh at Ellis's jokes instead of them stepping on each other's toes. I mean,
you and I, we've had like some on-air, well, on Sight and Sound Weekly, we'll disagree about things from time to time, and it is what it is. That's a lot different when you take like certain like little personal quirks or tics that annoy you or annoy me and this and that. When you take them on air, we've had things like that in the past, but
which is funny because you and I think we're pretty transparent about that. Like I think I like talking about what bothers us on air because it's just for one, it's an easy way to work things out for whatever reason, but it's also great content. So
but there is an amount of time to where like I feel like you and I, and I'm sure they're this way too, there's a clock, I think, where like
maybe
does the audience want to hear this much of what, you know, this stuff? Is this wearing down the audience so much? And it wasn't wearing me down. Like, I'm not trying to be critical about the show itself and the episode. It was a great episode. I actually loved this episode. I've loved all the Harloff and Ellis episodes, but I really, really enjoyed this one. It was just, just kind of bummed me out for a little bit.
You know why we love this show?
What is that?
Because it's our show.
This show right here, After Schmoe? Or Harloff
and Ellis is what you and I do on a weekly basis.
It's Sight and Sound Weekly.
Except they, like I said, they have a lot more years on us, so it is funny to hear them talk about each other's quirks a little bit. But like you said, it just I'd much rather see them laugh at each other. But I don't want it to sound like I don't want them to discuss things and challenge each other, because I know the show, because it's Harloff and Ellis, it's not all about movies, but when they talk about movies, I still expect them to bring their own opinions to the table and challenge each other and discuss in the way that they normally would. I'm not saying that they can't have disagreements or things like that. I think it just hurts us as fans when we see them right out of the gate just fighting with each other, because it's happened a few times on this show. But
and to give them credit, they handle it really. I mean, they handle it well.
Sure.
Like they're never like screaming or being shitty with each other at all. It's very well calculated, and I do appreciate that. And of course, the stuff that I'm saying, the stuff that I'm bringing up, I'm sort of playing it up a little bit for the show. But it just love one another.
I pulled a Jaye Williams and didn't take notes, so I don't really have anything else. And to be honest, I don't know exactly how much, and we can sort of start closing this out unless you have anything else.
Well, a lot of the episode was, well, maybe not a lot of it. A big portion of the first part of the show was talking about the podcast feed, and we've talked about the podcast feed. We sort of unpacked it.
Yeah, is that it?
That's it. Do you want to wrap up here and sort of talk a little bit about what people can expect from Collider Afterthoughts next week?
Right. So as you mentioned,
and in the future,
yeah, absolutely. As you mentioned, Brian Ward is going to be doing our art, so I'm excited to see that. That's actually what our email is about. So we're going to be talking to Brian rather, about what he's gonna do for the logo. So that's exciting. I don't know where that logo is going to appear exactly, because we are a show that appears on another podcast feed, not our own. So some apps allow you to do it episode by episode, some don't. So maybe some of you will see it and some of you will not. But anyway, so that's coming. I have one of my best friends in the world. I don't know if we're going to use it. He's auditioning to write the theme song for the show. So my buddy Eric is going to be writing the new theme song. I don't know if I want to continue the opening the way that we do, because I think I do feel a little bit more pressure to sort of design our show similarly to how they design their show. So I might I might lose the After Schmoe intro, if you will, that Jay and I sort of opened with. And of course, all this is subject to change. I might change my mind, but that's sort of where my head is right now. But the personality and everything, the way that Jay and I will still be Jay and I within the show. But I don't know. It just kind of it feels right to me to do it that way. And we don't know exactly how we're going to handle all of the content because things like Collider Live, we're still months away from that. I don't even know where SK Plus is going to be, but you and I have sort of steered away from that kind of conversation anyway. I don't really even know as it stands. I don't know if we even need to ever talk about Harloff and Ellis ever again.
Oh, Christian's not going to like that.
Notable comes up.
There you go. You just said the right thing. There you go.
Well, I mean, it's on Schmoes No. So but it's also just it's such a discussion based show.
I mean, my whole.
I think you and I are sort of challenged talking about Harloff and Ellis anyway. It's sort of like we bring it up, but it's more of like mentioning things. So unless something like the basketball game, anything notable like that comes up, I don't know how much there is to
see,
to do.
that's a better way to phrase it, I think. It's just that, like, again, if we are going to be doing a show about Collider, we have to engross ourselves. And this is how we've done the show the past, year or so that we've done it. You have to engross yourself with everything that's sort of plugged into Collider to be aware of breaking news. Like, if we just missed out on the carpool that happened this week, and for whatever reason, like, we're lost in the woods and didn't have cell phone service and came back, like, what is all this shit that just got announced? Like, that would be crazy. So of course we're going to be tuning in to Harloff and Ellis to listen for interesting news and interesting dialogue that's being discussed, so that we can potentially bring it to this show. And we talked about it, I think, a couple weeks ago with all this new content popping up. I don't know how long afterthoughts, I'm going to have to get After Schmoe out of my lexicon, but I don't know the duration for every episode and what it's going to be, but we sort of, sometimes we go an hour, sometimes we go an hour and a half. It just sort of depends. But we look at all this content and we sort of just sift through the highlights that we feel like people should know. Mm-hmm. And if there's something that we missed out on, we rely on our listeners to let us know. Somebody brought up a couple weeks ago talking about the YouTube subscriber count. That's great content that we can talk about. And we really do rely on people to help inform us about things that we might miss.
The other thing too is that because we're only on the Movie Talk feed, and because discussing Jedi Council and Heroes can be monotonous, I don't know, I feel like I have to bring it up on here, but you're right. I only want to talk about the highlights. So if I was to outline each episode of Afterthoughts, I would only want 3 or 4 topics. Jay and I can probably take 10 minutes on each one and still fill out a show. It's going to be a Collider show, no doubt about it, but like I said, I'm not precious about bringing up anything on SK Plus. I'm not precious about Harloff and Ellis because I have to have a new attitude when hosting Afterthoughts. So Collider already does so much. I want the show to be as concise as possible, so that means we're only doing the highlights, like you said. So yeah, I don't even know if I ever want to bring up Heroes and Jedi Council on a daily basis. If we see like a new pundit like Jenna Bush, who has been killing it, she was on Jedi Council today. She did a great job as always. I do want to shout out those kind of people, but there's not. I don't think there's a lot of material to mine from that kind of thing. So,
well, I think a great example would be something like if they finally got John Boyega on the show. Yeah. That would obviously be something we would cover. Or if Jedi Council's podcast feed were to develop a new show that we thought was going to get a brand new audience for Collider, of course we're going to talk about that. That isn't going to change. The sort of business aspect of Collider, the analysis that we give about how the channel can grow and the different directions that we can take things, and the speculation, none of that will go away. The other thing that we're known for here, if there's somebody tuning in for the first time, like, hey, I'm going to give this an early shot, then thank you for doing that. That's awesome. But one of the things that we do here is we do analyze the movie fandom space from time to time. Like if there's something going on in the space, we talk about being in a bubble and getting outside of the bubble. None of that is going to change. And I'm excited to bring that to Collider because it's conversations that's not had, and it's directly related to our listeners. Like the experience of being a fan in this space of movies, it goes beyond just the movies that you watch. It goes into your psychology. It goes into things that you might want to see and things that you don't want to see from this channel. All of that's going to be staying the same.
Another thing that I want to do, and still, to be honest, I still have to have conversations with the powers that be, but the reality is, just from my experience, people like Fernandez, Christian, they like that we're not in the studio. They want us to be the outside voice. And for the most part, Jay and I, we're left alone. And I give them tremendous credit for just letting us do our thing and discuss whatever we want to discuss. And that's fantastic. So I think they really like that we're not in that building. That way they keep us on our toes and we have a fresh perspective that they might not be privy to elsewhere. So that's sort of how they view our show. But because we are moving to Collider, I think people there are going to take us a lot more seriously. I think now, Jay and I have joked a lot about people not even knowing who we are in the studio, but because we are where we are now, and because we were mentioned on the announcement today, we were mentioned on Movie Talk, Perry knows who we are. Thad favorited my tweet today. It's funny to kind of say that out loud because maybe some people think that we talk to all these people, but we don't. But because these people now are forced to know who we are, we're going to be taken more seriously. I want to implement these personalities into our show. I don't want to interview them. I don't think Jay and I have any interest in interviewing any of these people. But if something funny happens between me and Rocha, like I say, I don't know what Rocha does when he produces Heroes. I want to, on the fly, be able to call Rocha and have him sit on this show, talk to him for 10 minutes, kick him off, and then Jay and I just move on. That's the kind of stuff I want to do, and I hope that we have their cooperation. I know that I could probably just message those people personally and say, hey, Jay and I are recording at this particular time. Can you give me 10 minutes? Yes or no? We'll work it out. That's the kind of stuff I want to do as well, and I think that that's something that's very different to what we've done at After Schmoe. So we'll see. There's still kind of conversations that I have to have with that kind of thing, but it's something that I was thinking a lot about lately.
Yeah, and I think from a guest perspective, any guests that we have on here, we want to put the After Schmoe / Afterthoughts spin on whatever it is. Like, yeah, I want to know the inside out stuff of, or the ins and out stuff of Rocha producing and being a personality. I want to know how stressful it is for Ellis to balance out all this movie knowledge with a full brain of stand-up comedy in it. You know what I'm saying? Like,
sure,
stuff that just gets down to the nitty-gritty that we think this audience would find entertaining, just beyond things like the life story and how you got to Collider. That's what things like One-on-One are for, and this and that. I'm excited, man. I'm excited about the future. I'm gonna miss After Schmoe. It's kind of like closing a chapter, closing a door. After Schmoe is kind of where everything started. What are your thoughts on just ending the show?
I don't know, man. I mean, I started this podcast. I told Christian, I told Ellis, I told Mark Riley. I remembered a conversation I had with Riley a long time ago. I started this show because I love this community. I love this brand, and I loved this content. It sort of opened a new world up to me. And I remember the conversations that I had with them. I said, look, I want to do a good job. I care about this. I hope one day that I can be considered one of your peers. And I told Riley today, I was like, hey, remember that conversation we had? This right now, this moment, it's the first time that I've truly felt like I'm a peer of these guys, and it's everything that I've worked for. It's everything that you and I want for Sight and Sound. I don't think After Schmoe could be what it is without our dynamic. So when you take that into consideration, I'm not as precious about After Schmoe as you might think, because it's us and it's what we've wanted. And I don't know, man. I mean, yes, of course I'm stressed, I'm panicked, but I think we're ready, and I'm more excited than anything. So honestly, the last thing on my mind is how precious I feel about After Schmoe. I mean, I'll never forget the journey, but let's face it, this is what I've wanted for years, and it's something that you and I are ready for.
Yeah, for sure. I'm so super grateful to everybody that's been involved with the show. I'm super grateful that you had me on to be your co-host. I'm super grateful for Mark and Christian for believing in me and giving me the opportunity, and obviously Mark Fernandez throwing him into the mix for this new opportunity. This community, I've said it before, is fantastic. It's amazing. And listen, the thing about Schmoeville that I will always listen, when a lot of this stuff happened this week, when a lot of this news broke, guess where I went to sort of use the space that I used to talk to the most people was Schmoeville, because it is, in my opinion, the best movie community on the internet, at least the movie community that has the most people in it with one sort of idea to support this group of individuals. And of course, I've got to give a huge shout out to the Sight and Sound Facebook group. A lot of people came over from Schmoeville who enjoyed our show, and then a ton of other people who were, actively trying to sort of invite them into this space as well. And they've done a fantastic job at supporting us over the last however long that group has been out there. I want to give a big shout out to Brad Donovan and Luke Jaggers that help sort of maintain all of that. On Sight and Sound Weekly, on the show that we do, our podcast, our brand, we're probably going to be talking a little bit about what this means for just Ryan and I both together. This is something that we've worked really, really hard for years, even before we did this show. And the last thing that I want to say is that even when I was outside of this group, it had such a vibrant pulse to it that I couldn't avoid it. I was enamored with it as an outsider, and then to be brought into it has just been a great honor and a great blessing. And yeah, I love the SK Plus family. I love all you guys listening to this and follow us over. And this is as much to do with you all listening as it has to do with us. And let's just take a little bit of a piece of ownership in this, and let's celebrate together over on the Movie Talk feed.
Well said. Well said. Yeah, I don't think everybody knows that you and I, maybe they do, especially if they listen to Sight and Sound. I don't think people realize that you and I have had a friendship that goes beyond After Schmoe. Like, we know each other, we live next to each other. And yeah, I remember you were sort of on the outside of all of this. You heard me in my journey, my early journey, with this community and this podcast, and yeah, we had a ton of conversations about this brand off air, and you said it, and I agree 100%. I don't think anybody can discuss what we do as well as we do, and I'm amazed that we have such big fans, and I'm very thankful for all of our listeners that listen to us. I mean, there are people who take our word and go, and that's incredible to me. I mean, that's amazing, and I'm flattered and honored by that. Yeah, it's just kind of a lot to unpack, but like I said, I think you and I are ready. We've been doing a pretty good job. And so I'm ready. I'm ready for the next thing.
Absolutely. Where can they find you on the interwebs?
Twitter and Instagram at WhatUpSnell. I'm terrible at video games, but I am streaming on Twitch at Sight and Sound. We pretty much have every single link imaginable So if you're wanting to support Jay and I with what we do at Sight and Sound, you can check that out in the description down below. It's probably going to be the last time. I don't know if we're allowed to crank out the Sight and Sound goodness on the Movie Talk feed.
You hear that? We better be.
But just make sure.
I don't even. Where is? I guess you're still going to be able to get Sight and Sound Weekly on SK Plus. So I guess we're not completely leaving.
Oh, we're gonna.
The feed. We're taking it to Collider.
We're gonna ride that horse as long as we can. Oh man, there's still a lot of there's a lot of things that I haven't even thought of yet. They're still in question, but that's fine. But anyway, one last thank you to Christian, Fernandez, and Ellis for being our biggest fans, and we're pumped. Jaye Williams, where are you at?
You can find me at Jaye Williams, J to the A to the Y to the E on Twitter and Instagram. It's the same for both. You can also check out all of the future shows that we're going to be pitching to Collider Factory over at Sight and Sound.
Yeah.
We have a YouTube channel. You can subscribe to it for additional content. Yes, you can see our faces. We're not faceless ghouls on the internet. And we have our own podcast network. That thing, the idea that they completely stole from us, it exists.
Yeah.
It's called Sight and Sound.
Yeah.
We do Sight and Sound Weekly, sure. Sight and Sound After Party, Sight and Sound Movies sometimes. Allegedly, we're still we're trying to define what that is these days.
Let's Talk Legion just came back.
Yep, TV recaps, and I do a music show every single Friday. Just a plethora of content for you to fill your brain with Ryan and Jay goodness. It's out there. We out there. We're also on Spotify. So for all you guys waiting around for the Collider podcast feed, you could totally listen to Sight and Sound on Spotify while you're waiting. That's all I've got, man.
Jay's doing that music show you want. And you know what I just realized? Let's try to get TV recaps on Collider Factor.
You know what's funny is somebody recommended that in the comments of Harloff and Ellis, and somebody was like,
"Yeah,
replace TV talk. I don't want that Sight and Sound shit in my life," or something like that. I don't remember what he said, but I was like, what? Are there people that just harbor like straight up resentment towards us? Actually, I know that's probably the fact. Absolutely.
Yeah.
And you know what? That's totally fine. I'm all about it. In fact, shoot me a tweet or something. I'd love to talk to you.
You know why it's fine?
Because we out here?
Because we're on the Collider Movie Talk podcast feed, motherfuckers.
That's right. More on that in Sight and Sound Weekly.
Guys, thank you so much. We're out. Bye.